It was supposed to be a rehearsal dinner. Champagne, laughter, maybe a few embarrassing stories from childhood. What I got instead was a final, searing lesson in humiliation, one that burned through every illusion I had left. The room was warm with candlelight, filled with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of crystal. The greenhouse on Ninth looked like a dream, all ivy walls and hanging lights, the kind of place brides post about with hashtags and soft filters. My dress was cream silk, off-shoulder, simple. I had worn my mother's pendant, something blue, something hers. She couldn't be there, not physically. She'd passed away last year. But I felt her that night, or at least I thought I did, until they opened their mouths. Lorraine Royce, my would-be mother-in-law, stood for her toast. She held her glass like a queen, back straight, smile tight. "To Landon and Samantha," she began, her voice clear and rehearsed. "To a future that's bright and, hopefully, a little more polished than the past." Laughter. Scattered, confused. I frowned. She continued. "And to Landon's good taste, of course. Though his fiancé's mother may have been just a nurse, bless her soul, I suppose being absent saves us the embarrassment of any rustic influences tomorrow." My heart stopped. I stared at her, then at Landon. He chuckled. Not loudly, not cruelly. Just enough. Like it didn't matter. Like I was supposed to let it slide. Something inside me cracked. A thin, bright fracture, starting at the base of my spine and reaching up behind my ribs. I set down my fork. Lorraine smiled at me. That smile women like her reserved for dogs that bark too loudly. And still Landon said nothing. I could have stayed seated. I could have swallowed the insult, like I had every other time they called me quaint or earnest or too sensitive. I could have reminded myself it was just a joke and that the real ceremony was tomorrow and that love was compromise. But it wasn't. Love was respect. And there, in that moment, I had none. I stood slowly. My chair scraped against the stone floor. 60 heads turned toward me, glasses still half lifted. The string quartet faltered, one of them missing a note. Landon looked confused. "Sam," he asked, half rising. I slipped the engagement ring off my finger. My hand didn't shake, not even a little. "There won't be a wedding," I said, clearly, evenly. "Not tomorrow. Not ever." A murmur. A gasp. Lorraine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I placed the ring on the linen-covered table in front of Landon. The diamond caught the candlelight as it landed with a soft thud. "Your mother's right," I said. "She's not here, and she deserves better than this." Then I walked, past the waiters frozen mid-step, past the relatives I'd only just met, past the girl in the powder blue dress who whispered, "Oh my God," like she was watching a scene from TV. Out the door, into the cool Spokane night, heels clicking against stone. No one followed me. Not yet. But I knew the storm was coming. And I was finally ready to stand in the rain. 3 weeks earlier, the apartment still smelled like lavender and dust. I hadn't opened the guest room in months, not since I packed away my mother's last things. I stood at the door for a long time that morning, hand on the knob, heart steady in a way that felt unfamiliar. I finally stepped inside. The light filtered through gauzy curtains she had sewn herself. A half-empty mug still sat on the nightstand. I hadn't moved it. I couldn't. Grief was a strange animal. It didn't howl or claw, it just waited. Quiet, patient. Some mornings, I thought I heard her hum in the kitchen, the same soft hymn she used to sing when I was sick. Other days, it was the silence that reminded me she was gone. I had taken care of her until the very end. No nurses, no home aides, just me. I had watched her heart fail slowly, one skipped beat at a time. The woman who had stitched together my world was being undone by her own. And through it all, I held her hand. After she passed, people kept saying, "She's in a better place now." But I had loved the place she was in, this place with me. And I didn't want better. I wanted her. That was when Landon proposed. We were sitting on the floor of my living room, eating takeout from the Ethiopian place she used to love. I was still wearing my pajamas. He didn't kneel. He didn't have a speech, just held out the ring with shaky hands and said, "Let's make something good come out of something hard." I said yes. I didn't stop to wonder if it was grief talking. Landon had always been steady, predictable in a comforting way. He wore khakis on weekends and ironed his shirts on Sundays. He didn't know how to fix a sink, but he could quote Thoreau with irritating precision. When I met his parents the first time, Lorraine had smiled at my plain black dress and said, "Oh, we do love a minimalist." Howard asked if I had grown up around here, the way some people ask if you've ever eaten sushi. I laughed it off, told myself I was marrying Landon, not his parents. That love was enough. That lie stayed with me. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I found myself apologizing for things I didn't understand. The flowers weren't tasteful enough. The ceremony music was too emotional. My dress wasn't elegant, it was sweet. That word stung more than I admitted. And the worst part, Landon didn't notice. Or maybe he did and decided not to care. He wasn't cruel. He just wasn't brave. And I had mistaken that for kindness. One night, after yet another awkward dinner with the Royces, I came home and sat on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes. No tears, just silence. My mother used to say silence was holy. That's when you hear the truth whispering. The truth was, I wasn't building a life. I was shrinking to fit someone else's. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, controlled. She looked like she had surrendered so many little things, she no longer remembered what her voice sounded like. And still I told myself, just make it to the wedding. Just get through the rehearsal dinner. 3 weeks later, I would realize I hadn't lost my mother only to lose myself. 1 loss was enough. 2 would be unforgivable. The Royce house was the kind of place that echoed with its own sense of importance. Every wall was decorated in gold-framed oil paintings, landscapes with no people. The air always smelled faintly of polished wood and restraint. No shoes on the rugs, no loud laughter, no traces of real life. I had only been there twice before. This time was different. Lorraine wanted to finalize wedding details, which I quickly learned meant redo everything I had already chosen. We sat around the mahogany table. The one she bragged was imported from Austria. My binder full of color palettes and calligraphy samples looked cheap against its surface. She flipped through it with 2 manicured fingers, frowning without speaking. Howard sipped scotch by the fireplace, watching without offering a word. Landon scrolled through his phone. "So," Lorraine said finally, "you really are set on this church ceremony?" I blinked. "Yes. St. Paul's is where my mother was baptized." "She always wanted me to," Lorraine interrupted. "It's very humble, Samantha, and the acoustics are dreadful." I tried to smile. "I already booked the quartet." "Oh." She tilted her head. "I assumed you'd reconsider." Howard set down his glass. "Is there parking at that church? Our guests won't want to walk too far in heels." I looked at Landon. He didn't look up. "We'll arrange shuttles," I said. "I've already checked." "Of course," Lorraine murmured. "And the hymn you chose for the ceremony, what was it again? Abide with me?" A bit mournful, no. It was my mother's favorite. Lorraine smiled the way people do when they're pretending something isn't awkward. "Darling, of course, but perhaps something less personal." My fingers tightened on the edge of the chair. She continued, flipping another page. "And this dress, A-line satin, no embellishment. Are you sure you want something so understated?" "It's my mother's design. She made it when I was 16. That finally got Landon's attention. "You never told me that." I glanced at him. "You never asked." Silence thickened the room. For a moment, I could hear the ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Lorraine closed the binder and pushed it away gently, like one might handle a dead bird. Well, she said, I suppose we all mourn in our own ways. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't cry, but something in me began to steel. I appreciate your input, I said quietly, but I've already made my decisions. Howard raised an eyebrow. You're not very flexible for someone joining a new family. I looked at Landon again. Still no reaction. No support. I walked out. The hallway smelled like old lilies and museum silence. I reached the front door before Lorraine's voice followed me. Samantha, she said with a tone both icy and amused. You'll want to remember that marriages are about compromise. I turned. No, I replied, meeting her gaze. Good marriages are about respect. And I don't compromise on my mother's memory. Then I left. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the breeze. The sun was low, casting shadows across the Royce estate like long fingers. I sat in my car, engine off, and stared at their house for a long time. That was the night I realized I wasn't marrying into a family. I was surrendering to one, and I wasn't sure I had the stomach for it. The wind tasted like dust and steel. At 6:45 a.m., the sun barely touched the tops of the scaffolding. I stood near the eastern lot, clipboard in hand, watching two men argue over measurements. My boots were caked in concrete, my hair pulled into a knot so tight it hurt. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours, but it wasn't the blueprints or budget reports that kept me up. It was that voice, Lorraine's, looping in my head like a poison hymn. Not very flexible, mournful hymn, compromise. That morning I wasn't Samantha the engineer. I was the daughter who'd given up every night out, every promotion, every vacation just to sit beside a hospital bed and read to a woman who forgot what day it was but always remembered my name. I should have been proud. Instead, I felt like I was shrinking in real time. Hey, Sam, you good? Elijah, one of the site managers, waved from across the pit. He was tall, kind-eyed, always brought me coffee without asking how I took it. Yeah, elite. Just thinking. He tilted his head. You sure you want to take time off for this wedding? I forced a laugh. You say that like it's a funeral. He paused. Same dress code, same awkward family tension. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. He noticed. You okay? He asked again, quieter this time. I exhaled. Do you ever feel like you're planning something for someone else's life? Like you're the guest, not the bride? He scratched his beard. Can't say I've been a bride, Sam. But if you're not walking towards something that feels like home, maybe it's time to ask why. That stuck with me. I sat on the edge of a concrete form, legs dangling, and thought about all the little ways I'd bent to fit the Royce mold. I had cut down the guest list to appease their image, replaced handwritten place cards with embossed gold, took my mother's poem out of the program because Howard said it sounded sentimental. I had given, and in return I got silence. And in that silence, the truth grew teeth. I opened my phone and scrolled through my photos. There was one of my mother, taken during her last Christmas. She was wearing a ridiculous red sweater I had knit lopsided, her oxygen line tucked carefully behind her ear. She was laughing. No makeup, no filter, just joy. That was the last time I remembered being sure of anything. A tear slipped down my cheek and dried almost instantly in the wind. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stood up. Later that night, at home, I tried to talk to Landon. He was sitting on the couch, legs up, TV glowing in the background. Do you think your mom likes me? I asked softly. He didn't look away from the screen. Sure, she just has high standards. I pressed on. Do you think she respects my mother? He frowned. Sam, she's dead. Why does that matter? I stared at him. It wasn't anger that rose first, it was disbelief. And then, slowly, clarity. I need someone who'll defend me when I can't speak, I said, voice cracking. Not someone who'll stay quiet when people step on the only person who ever protected me. He didn't reply, just shrugged. You're overreacting. That was the final thread unraveling. I knew then I wouldn't just be marrying a man. I'd be marrying silence. And I had already buried one love I couldn't live without. I wasn't about to bury myself next. The air outside was sharp, crisp with that early autumn edge that made every breath feel like a warning. I didn't stop walking until I reached the parking lot. My heels clicked against stone, my breath visible under the amber glow of the street lamps. The silk dress stuck to my back with sweat. I didn't know if it was adrenaline or heartbreak. I heard the door behind me open. Samantha, wait. Landon. I didn't turn around. He jogged until he was beside me, his tie slightly askew, face flushed, not with shame, just panic. The kind of panic people feel when they lose control, not when they lose love. What the hell was that? He hissed. You humiliated me. I blinked at him. I humiliated you. He looked over his shoulder as if to make sure no one had followed us, then lowered his voice. Look, my parents can be intense, but they mean well. Mean well. I repeated. Your mother called mine an embarrassment, and you laughed. I didn't laugh at her, he said defensively. It was just a joke. You're being sensitive again. There it was, that word. Again. Sensitive. Like grief was a weakness. Like standing up for my dead mother was dramatic. I reached into the clutch bag, still clutched under my arm. Slowly, I pulled out the wedding vows I had printed earlier that morning, folded into thirds, written in ink. I handed them to him. What is this? My vows, I said. They talk about loyalty, about protecting each other. You never earned them. He looked down at the paper, then at me. You're not thinking clearly. No, I said softly. I've never thought more clearly in my life. The door swung open again. Lorraine stepped out, her heels louder than necessary, mouth already mid-sentence. Samantha, you will regret this. You are making a scene. This isn't how mature women handle disappointment. I turned to face her fully. She stood just feet away, her pearls catching the light like claws. You're right, I said calmly. This isn't how mature women handle disappointment. It's how they handle disrespect. I reached up and unclasped the pendant around my neck. My mother's pendant, the one Lorraine had mocked when she thought I couldn't hear. I held it between my fingers for a moment, then clasped it back, firmer this time, like armor. You will not shame her memory again, I said, my voice no longer shaking. Not while I'm still breathing. Lorraine's jaw tightened. Do you know how this makes our family look? I almost laughed. Yes, human, cruel, entitled. Landon stepped in, voice forced and brittle. Sam, please, let's just go back inside and talk, I cut him off. There's nothing to talk about. You showed me who you were. I just finally believed you. A valet stood nearby, awkwardly pretending not to listen. I walked toward him, nodded once, and handed him my parking ticket. My car arrived within a minute, its headlights sweeping across Landon's stunned face like a spotlight in a courtroom. I opened the door, then paused. I'm not the girl you get to silence with guilt or tradition, I said. I was raised by a woman who taught me how to love. You were raised by people who taught you how to tolerate cruelty. I'm not marrying into that. Then I got into the car and shut the door. I didn't cry. Not then. I just drove. Out of the lot. Down through the quiet streets of downtown Spokane. Past closed boutiques and glowing windows full of strangers eating dinner. I drove until the restaurant lights were gone, until their voices were gone, until the weight on my chest finally loosened, and I could breathe again. The apartment was too quiet, not peaceful, not still, just quiet in the way a room feels after something has been ripped out of it. I hadn't left much. The wedding dress was already returned. The venue deposit lost. The invitations recycled. What remained were the ghosts of choices I no longer claimed. Menus I never tasted, centerpieces I never saw, promises I never meant to keep. My phone vibrated every few hours. At first, it was Landon. We should talk. You overreacted. My parents want to fix this. Then it was mutual friends. Then strangers. Comments on my work profile. Whispers about the woman who walked out on a wedding. Someone posted a blurry photo of me from that night, walking toward my car, back straight, hair falling down. The caption read, "This bride said no." At the rehearsal, some people cheered, others scoffed, but all of them talked like I was a headline, not a person. I stopped reading. Instead, I did something else. I opened the closet and took out the cedar box Mom had left me. Inside, old letters, clipped recipes, and a note in her slanted handwriting. It read, "When they don't clap for you, clap for yourself." I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since that night, not because I regretted leaving, but because I regretted waiting so long. The next morning, I emailed my boss, told her I needed to step back for a while, use up the vacation days I'd hoarded like war rations for years. Then I packed a single suitcase, cleaned out the fridge, and left the apartment key on the counter. There was no ceremony for that moment, no toast, no audience. Just me locking the door behind a version of myself I no longer wanted to be. I drove out to the edge of Spokane, where the city thins into fields and forgotten barns. There was a tiny cabin I'd once helped design during a rural housing project. It had never been used. The developer said it was too far from the city to market. I called him, asked if it was still available. He laughed. "It's yours if you want to breathe for a while." So I took it. No Wi-Fi, no marble countertops, just pine walls and wind and space. I slept 12 hours straight the first night. Woke up sore from relief. I spent the next few days in silence. Real silence. Not the silence of resentment or disapproval. The kind that listens back when you breathe. One evening, I gathered the wedding programs and vows I'd written, took them outside and lit a small fire, not out of rage, but as a goodbye. Each page curled inward like a sigh. By the time the flame died, the weight on my chest had lightened. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel brave. I felt clean. I kept my phone off for another week. When I finally turned it on, there were no more calls from Landon. Just one text. "Guess you got what you wanted." I smiled, because he was wrong. I didn't get what I wanted. I gave up what I didn't deserve. The for lease sign on the old bookstore had faded in the sun. It hung crooked in the window like it had given up months ago, just like the cracked flower pots along the front step and the dust layering each pane. But when I looked through the glass, I didn't see ruin, I saw possibility. I called the number. The owner picked up on the second ring. His voice was slow, kind, and surprised. "You're serious? You want to rent the place?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I don't want to rent it," I said. "I want to bring it back to life." By the end of the week, I had signed the lease and pulled on work gloves. The first thing I did was take down the old, warped sign. The second was hang up a framed photo of my mother, her in her hospital scrubs, arms crossed, smiling like she'd just told someone off in the sweetest way. I named the shop June's Light. Every day after that started the same. A mug of coffee, the creak of the front door, a little bell above the frame that chimed like laughter. I kept the shelves simple. Old paperbacks, secondhand poetry, recipe cards written in shaky cursive, stories that had already survived so much. Locals wandered in one by one. Some were curious. Others just wanted a place to sit quietly for a while. A retired school teacher named Meredith came every Friday at noon. A man with burned scars on his hands left $5 every time he took a book, even when it was marked free. And then one afternoon, a girl about 10 years old walked in holding her grandmother's hand. She ran her fingers along the shelves and whispered, "It smells like someone's thinking." I laughed. "It smells like old paper and stubborn dreams." The grandmother tilted her head. "Your name's Carter?" I nodded. She smiled gently. I knew a nurse named June Carter. She held my hand once back in '09. I'd just lost my son. I was shaking. She didn't let go the entire night. I blinked. That was my mother. The woman touched her chest. She was the first person who looked at me like I hadn't broken. I turned away before the tears could fall. I rearranged a stack of cookbooks, but my hands trembled. That night I stayed late. I lit a candle by the photo of my mom and sat on the floor, surrounded by soft spines and folded corners. "Are you proud of me?" I whispered. "I finally stopped asking people to love me the way you did." The flame flickered. The windows fogged. Somewhere outside, an owl cried into the dark. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I felt rooted. I wasn't rebuilding. I was growing. Not in spite of the pain, but because of it. The chimes above the door jingled, just after 3 p.m., a sound I'd come to love. Predictable, warm, human. I was behind the counter, labeling a new stack of donated books. I glanced up without much thought, then froze. Landon, standing there in a wool coat, hair slightly longer, eyes scanning the shelves like he wasn't sure if he should have come in at all. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just watched. He took a step forward, then another. Hands in his pockets. Nervous. "It's quiet here," he said, voice softer than I remembered. "That's the point," I replied. He looked around. "You really did it. The bookstore thing." I nodded. "I did." He gestured toward the photo of my mother, hanging in the far corner. "She would have liked this." "She would have loved it," I said. "She would have known every regular's name by now, and probably made them soup." Landon smiled faintly. Then it faded. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. Folded paper. I recognized it instantly. My vows. The ones I'd handed back to him that night. Unread. "I never looked at them," he said, "until last week." I said nothing. "They were beautiful," he continued. "Better than anything I would have said." I looked at him then, really looked. He seemed smaller. Not physically. Spiritually. Like someone who had lost the center of a room he used to own. "Why are you here, Landon?" He swallowed. "To apologize. Properly. I should have stood up for you. For her. For the way they treated you. I was a coward." I nodded. "Yes, you were." Silence again. He ran a hand through his hair. "They're still talking about it, you know. What happened that night." "I'm sure they are. They think I dodged a bullet." I smiled just a little. "So do I." That stunned him for a moment. Then he said the thing I think he came all this way to say. "You were right. About everything. And I was wrong." I leaned on the counter, calm, steady. "I didn't leave to be right, Landon. I left to be free." He looked down at the floor. "I miss you." "No," I said gently. "You miss the version of me who didn't speak up, who made you comfortable. That version doesn't live here anymore." He nodded slowly, folded the vows again, and placed them on the counter. "I should go," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "You should." He turned and walked to the door, paused, looked back. "You ever think about what we could have been?" "Every day," I replied. "And then I opened this shop, and I don't have to wonder anymore." He didn't have a response. The chimes sang again as the door opened. Then he was gone. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow threatened the edges of the sky. I watched him disappear into it, not angry, not broken, just erased. Not by vengeance, by growth, by choosing peace over proximity. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain closed. Then I turned to the counter, picked up the vows he had left behind, and fed them to the fireplace. The paper curled instantly, blackened edges folding like wings. My mother once told me, "You can't make someone value what they've never been taught to see." I had tried, and now I simply let go. Behind me, the shop door opened again. Meredith walked in, holding 2 cups of tea. "I brought ginger this time," she said. You looked like you needed something warm. I smiled. Perfect timing. We sat by the window together, two women who'd lived through too much to pretend anymore. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, the fire danced. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely, unmistakably home.